I have seen so many pictures of Henry Hall, and as just an iconic Jamestown personality.
And he would be very upset if you didn't call him Henry.
Ah, I stand corrected.
Because people thought it was French, and he said, oh no, he was named after his uncle Henry, and it was very important to him that that was his name, but yes.
So tell me about him.
Well, he grew up in Jamestown, went away to prep school and then to Harvard, got 2 degrees at Harvard, came back to go in the family business, which was a newspaper business that his grandfather had started with his father by buying it about 1860. And they were together in the evening journal. And he, with his father, was editor and publisher. And at that time, there were 2 newspapers, the Jamestown Morning Post and the Jamestown Evening Journal. And the Post was owned by the Sheldon family, and the Journal was owned by the Hall family. And Henry Hall was a very direct person who believed in the truth. And he put in the paper that Julia Sheldon Livengood had had a DWI, or she was Julia Sheldon at that point. And the Sheldon family was very upset. So when in 1941 the papers merged because the national advertisers would not advertise in more than 1 paper in a city less than 50,000, they merged the papers, and one of the conditions was that Henry Hall would get out because of what he had done reporting Julia Sheldon's DWI in the paper back in the 30s or whenever it was, because the merger was in 41.
Yeah.
So they brought somebody in named Hill to run the place. 2 years later, Mrs. Sheldon came to my father and said, I'm sorry, but we need you back to run this place. So he went back a little while, ran it until he could retire, but he was retired as I was born. I mean, he married his secretary in 1941, and I came along in 42, but they were going to travel, and then I came along and messed it up.
So what's your impressions of him? You saw him obviously later in his life, much later in his life.
He was 58 when I was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was very well-meaning, well-intentioned, did a wonderful job, always very direct, had wonderful friends, and entertained a lot, and did nice things for the community. He was very active. He had been leading all kinds of different organizations around here, and was very active with Rotary Club was his favorite. I tell everybody that between my father and I, we had 64 years in Rotary. He had 64 and I had none. And so that was just the way he loved his Rotary. So that way we went many times to Florida or other places. We'd have to stop along the way because that particular little city we were going through had a Rotary meeting at that lunchtime. So my mother and I would have to go find a cafeteria so we could eat while he went to his luncheon meeting with Rotary. But that was very important to him.
So he was, after the merger occurred, did he have an ownership stake at the time when there was a merger?
They continued to have an ownership stake until in 1960 or 61, they came to the last possible Hall person who had been a Cub reporter that summer working the operas at Chautauqua and other things at Chautauqua to ask him, would you like it? And he said, absolutely not. And so I gave it up. So I said, thank you, no. So that was the end of the ownership. They sold us to the Ogden Nutting family from West Virginia.
So did you actually have to get involved in that at all?
Only to say no.
Yeah.
No, I had no interest. So no, that was not to my liking at the time.
So that was sold then to Ogden, and that became Ogden Publications, and who continues to own it to this day?
Correct.
The Jamestown Post-Journal. I know you're obviously very biased, but is there a legacy that your dad and who's so much a part of our community that you can kind of capsulize?
Well, he was very conservative, very Republican, and very old-fashioned, very chauvinistic. When I was born, he told people, thank God I have a son, now he can take care of his mother after I'm gone. But that was his idea, that that's what boys did, was take care of their mothers, and girls couldn't do that. So he was very direct. He was very involved in the community, and just had an office down in the furniture building. That was another enterprise of the Hall family, was the Jamestown Furniture Exposition building, which was built by Frederick P. Hall and Frank O. Anderson, who would be Quintus's grandfather.
Okay.
Or no, yeah, Quintus's grandfather, and my grandfather built that way back then. So Quintus and I had to resolve it back when everybody else died, and it was not such good shape, so we sold it to David Raines, who had a furniture store called Cornell and Raines at one point.
Were they having the Expositions then at the time when you sold it, or
No.
had it ended?
It had ended long before. They had it when I was a child. I used to enjoy it. I mean, I used to go up the stairs to his office on the back of the second floor many times. When I started when I was like 3 years old, walking up there with my mother or something. And now that office is used by the masseuse I go to, so it's kind of interesting.
Oh,
I
is
still
that
have
right?
still have the connection to that building and that office. Yep. Yeah. Now it was a nice, solid old building, and it was very full with furniture manufacturers way back in the beginning when Jamestown was the furniture capital of the world. It was amazing.
Were you destined to get into law, Chuck?
No, good heavens, no. No, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I don't know, like you, do what you wanted, but no, I went in the service after.
So you graduated in Jamestown? Were you in Jamestown
No.
High School, or did you go to
No.
private school?
I went to private school. And then after college was in the military and decided that wasn't what I wanted to do.
So
So
where'd you go to college?
Duke University
Duke?
with Stan. I mean, I was 3 years behind Stan,
Okay.
or maybe two, I guess 3 years behind Stan, but yeah, went to Duke. And then went in the military, the commission on graduation, and then decided that wasn't what I'd really had in mind, so I went to Wharton to get an MBA. And I was there the same 2 years that a certain Donald J. Trump was there, but he went there for 2 years after Fordham to get himself some real estate credentials, and I was getting an an MBA at the time, and then went to work with a CPA firm in Philadelphia, Arthur Young at the time. It's now Ernst & Young, or maybe it's Ernst & Ernst, I don't know, but those days it was Arthur Young, one of the big 8, and became a CPA and was working down there when I got a call from Stan Lundeen saying, hey, would you like to come back? Because we had a meeting at the old night lounge where a group of us were on the table, and we said, I'm going to run for mayor. We all laughed, and then he said, I'm serious, and went around the table and said, what job do you want? And I said, well, I'll be the fiscal guy, or the fiscal person if you need an accountant. So he called and put up or shut up, so that gave me an opportunity to come back to take care of my older parents, which was wonderful because I had 2 years with my dad before he was killed in a car accident. And then my mother was another 12 years, so it was great.
So how did your paths cross with Stan's? Was it at school?
Oh no, we grew up together at Moonbrook playing golf, and he was the head guy down at the Jamestown Municipal course down in JCC land there, and he also played his father. Elving Lundeen was an active golfer at Moonbrook, as was my father, and so we knew each other growing up. And then at Duke we rode together. And so we would come from here, and one of the big things in those days was we would all race. I mean, there were about 10 guys going to Duke at the same time, Peter Robinson and Veer Lindquist and Bruce Hagedorn, a whole bunch of guys. And so we'd race, different Charlie Goodell, we'd race to Mike and Sam's. So the idea would be to leave Duke when the class was over on Wednesday morning for Thanksgiving, race home, go home and say hi, Mom and Dad, and then rush down to Mike and Sam's and see who could get there first. So that was the situation in those days, so
Mike
different.
Lupriori and Sarah.
You got it.
Mike and Sarah. I went to school with young Mike.
Okay.
So that's a family connection, and you.
Well, excuse me, you also asked how did I get to law, and that was after doing that with Stan, I said I've had enough after 5 budgets and said I'd like to go back to law school, and so I went back, but by then I was married and had a 3-year-old daughter, so I commuted to Buffalo, but I just thought I'd like to be a lawyer at that point, so I was late coming to the game.
And you were late, University of Buffalo Law School.
Yep. That was the only place you could go and commute, or basically from here.
Now that Stan really having won, he calls in his chit, and because you had agreed at over a drink or two that if he actually won, not sure he would actually win, but he won, he calls in the chit, you say yes, it makes your, I'm sure your mom and dad thrilled to have you come back.
Well, I think, interestingly enough, my father, being a very conservative Republican, was very disappointed when Stan won the election. And so he went up to Stan and said, I'm sorry you won, I just hope you won't let the unions run you. And then that night I called, Dad, I'm coming home, Stan has asked me to do it. So the next day he saw Stan in the street and went up and put his arm around him. So I guess he was kind of excited, but that's how it turned out, because Stan told me later, because I had not told my dad that we had that conversation at the night lounge or anything like that, but he just was surprised when I told him I'm coming home to be the chief fiscal officer. So that was it. Yeah.
So this was sort of really a blue ribbon group that Stan had pulled together. If I win, politics aside, I want you guys to join me.
Yeah, that's true.
Who else was on this team?
Well, Mark Hampton was going to be a lawyer somehow, because Milt Sigworth was supposed to be the corporation counsel, and Bob Alessi was going to be his deputy, but then Milt had quite depression problems, so he decided to end it all, so he did, and then he was not going to be, so Bob became corporation counsel and Mark Hampton became assistant. So I worked a lot with Mark in those days. Joe Johnson, who was the same Navy Supply Corps officer that I had been, he was in the BPU running the finances for the BPU, and trying to think, Bill Reed, or was it Dick Reed, who was a lawyer too in those days? Yeah, and he left the area afterwards, but Russ Dietrich was looking just like he does now, being the head of Parks and Recreation for those guys. But a wonderful group of councilmen with Miles Lasser and Rand Chadwick and John White Carlson, and I mean, just what Brigriolo and Tony Raffa. And I think Tony's about the only one still around. John Y is not in good shape, I understand. But but no, it was quite a group that Stan put together, and very interesting. Sam Nelbon, of course, your neighbor up there, became the ombudsman because he was going to be the director of personnel, but a guy named Bill Hirschberger had been for Charlie Magnuson. And when Stan said, "You're fired," Bill Hirschberger said, "You can't. I'm civil service." So Stan had to create a job for Sam Nelbon to be ombudsman. And he had to live with Bill Hirschberger until he could get rid of him. Oh my gosh. So just interesting sidelight, but Sam did a wonderful job with the contracts and other things for him. He recruited a guy named John Ball to be fire chief. I think John Palladino was still continuing as police chief at the time. And Steve Carlson was the city clerk. And beyond that, my senility says I can't remember, I guess. Right. Completely new approach. The Republicans had it. Charlie Magnuson had been the mayor, and Moreland Lazier was his controller. And then they brought in a guy named Bill White to be the controller. And Bill, when Charlie Magnuson lost the election, he kind of did like Mr. Trump or our old Swanson, the DA, just stopped working when you lose the election. So Bill White left the town, did not do a budget, so I had to drag Moreland Lazier back in. So we did the first budget while we were up in some hotel, I can't remember which one, but we had a room away from the city hall. Perhaps it was Ford and Lundine's law office, but we did a budget based on other years with the help of Moreland Lazier without the former person involved. But Charlie Magnuson had been the attorney, and yes, it was, or the mayor, but yeah, difference in politics. I mean, when I was young, it was Greater Jamestown Party. There were not Republicans and Democrats, but then it became partisan later on. But Stan came up with a whole new situation, breath of fresh air. A young man came in and just turned it around, did a great job.
Labor Management Council, were you there at the time that happened?
Yep. Oh, and the Urban Renewal Agency, and I was by virtue of office, I had the opportunity to be a part of all that stuff.
And the Urban Renewal Agency, and of course that which occurred in Brooklyn Square and that whole process?
Yep. Yep. Charlie Barone, not the Barone who just died, but another Charlie Barone was involved with his Cosima Realty down there. Yeah. So there's good old times. Yeah. And the bus garage, we had the issues with the buses then. The buses were active in those days, and you come down Friday night, you couldn't find a place on the sidewalk to walk because it was so busy downtown. But the bus garage was another project that somebody suggested, why don't you put one over there on the back over there? It was a great idea, so it was. So we just expanded over there, but yeah. Some things we had in those days that we don't have now. But
City Hall, was that being built at the time, or had that been built?
No, City Hall was in the process of being built. My office was on the first corner in the first floor facing, or on the far side over by Prendergast. And Stan's was on this side facing toward Spring Street. But Stan did not have a bathroom. And so Stan was in a room that you had to go through his entryway, and then you're out in the open hallway. And so people could corner him. If you wanted to see Stan, you could come into his entryway, and he had no escape. So the important part of the new City Hall was to have a bathroom and a second door for Stan so he could get out if he didn't. So we moved into it in 71 or 72, Yeah, so that was being built when we came over here, and then it was demolished, but yeah.
So you had 5 years under the kind of the Lundin administration. Was there an aha moment when somebody put his arm around you, Chuck, and said, you should consider law?
No.
No?
No. I had inklings of it. Doris and I were going to get married shortly after I left Philadelphia, and we did when we got back up here, but I was thinking of going to California and take up law at that point. So I had an inkling to try to get the law because Being an accountant was wonderful, but I felt like a scorekeeper. I thought I could really be involved with advising and working with people as law more so than I could with the accounting. So that's how we got to law school.
So were you, during the time you were at UB, were you interning here or were you still working with the city?
I had left the city in spring of 1974, and then went to law school in September of that year, and had a client still from Philadelphia from my days down there, so I would go down there and work, and then had given up the city. And then after my second year, I had the opportunity with John Selstrom offered me a chance to come down to Lombardo, Selstrom, and Burgett. And so I spent 2 summers there, and then came to work there right after taking the cram course and taking the exam in 1977. And my first work there was, interestingly enough, I feel the same thing now, is to have Mike Lombardo invite one of his older Italian lady clients to come in and sit her down and start talking with her, and I'd be over in the corner and I'd be taking notes, and he'd say, now what did we want to do? And she'd tell him, and then I'd do it, and then I would go out and do the work, and then he'd invite her back in, and then he'd sit there like, you know, here's your stuff, sign here, do that. And so I was his caddy for a while yet, because he was on his last legs, and Bertha was in very bad shape, and she eventually died while I was doing that. But now I'm at that situation where we brought in an estate the other day because I'm hanging it up, and so we brought the family in, and Kristen, my stepdaughter and partner, was there to meet with them, and so I talked with them, and she took notes, and then she took over the file. So it's just deja vu all over again with your Yogi Berra baseball reference here. But yeah, so that's what it was. But Mike Lombardo, 50 years ago, or not 53, 45 years ago, but that's what happened, yeah.
So for Mike Lombardo is like everybody, certainly of a certain age, has a story about Mike, and he was certainly at the end of his career, but did he ever sit down with you, Chuck, and tell war stories?
No, he did not tell war stories, but the story was he never lost a murder case. He defended a lot of people and got them off. And so he never lost a client, but no, they didn't. You'd get that more from Burgett or John Selstrom, but not from me. Yeah.
So it was Lombardo, Selstrom, and Burgett. And how did they split up the work in the office? Mike was he more or less rainmaker at that point?
He was a rainmaker. He had the corner office over on the 6th floor of the hotel. And then Dale Robbins and I had little offices down on the 3rd Street side. Then Hope Frederickson, Don Lynn, what's her name, Birmingham, Carolyn Birmingham, and others came through the office before it split up in 1980 or 81. Then Burgett and Robbins went up to 5th Street. Well, actually, they went over to the Courier Capital office on Lafayette Street, Lafayette and 5th. And I stayed in the hotel with Milt Battler for a while. It was on my own while they did that. And then John Selstrom moved up to 4th Street to his building he had with Bob Barger up there.
And John, so it was then became Burgett and Robbins, and John was by himself?
I think Hope went with him for a while.
Yeah, you're right.
But then it became him for a while until Steve came back to join him.
Was there an area, Chuck, of practice that you found yourself all of a sudden away from being with a bunch of people, 4 or 5 at any time? Now you're by your lonesome.
Milt had a couple rooms up on the 9th floor of the hotel. So I took up there and had my secretary, Madeline Olson, and then Tess Regan was a part-timer with us. So we had this little office up there, and then it was all by myself. So at that point, you kind of give up vacations and other things that you used to when you have the opportunity. But fortunately, I had the years where I knew what forms to get, what to do, how to do it, and so I wasn't starting from scratch, as some poor people have to do, is just to come in there and try it. So I had a mentoring situation and had people that I had worked with, but then I was on my own, so it made a little different situation. So it certainly is more fun to have the firm there that you discuss issues with. I'm sure you found the same thing. There's always somebody to talk to who knows more than you do about something, and so it works out well. But that's nice to see that the Bar Association now is thinking of doing that, and some thought that there's a grant, I guess, to allow students at law schools to come back and be interns paid by the grant instead of by Phillips Lytle to come work for you in the summer to do that. But it was good that I learned that way and had the opportunity to be mentored by some people who'd been in the business for a long time. But yeah, it was significantly different to go up there by myself and to be the one who put the long hours in on the weekends and the early mornings and late nights, and always, of course, be the first one there and the last one to leave to do that. One of the fun of having your own business. But I was a little older when I did that, so instead of starting in their early 20s like people do now for coming out of law school, I was in my late 30s, so it was a little different.
Madeline Olson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she had been a secretary with somebody else before, hadn't she?
She had been a longtime secretary for Dan Isaacson. Was it Dan?
Dan.
Okay, Dan Isaacson, and he was the Swedish consul, and that was a big part of his work. Mm-hmm. And she carried him for a long time after he got into some issues. Mm-hmm. And then John Selstrom was very anxious to take that on, so he hired Madeline. And then when I came with him, she was dedicated to me as a secretary. But Madeline brought the Swedish consulate with her when she went with John Selstrom. But Dan Isaacson was a long-time local lawyer.
And kind of continue that. You were by yourself for an extended period of time, well-known, and continue to be well-known, for your tax expertise, which became you, so from a surrogate's court perspective or tax issues, you were the go-to guy here. Did you feel like that was your niche?
Well, the estate practice was Jim Abdallah actually was the tax guy. Mm-hmm. So we sent him to him, but then when he phased out, I took over as part of that. But I enjoy estates because it's kind of like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, which I enjoy doing. So that was my niche. I'm much more into transactions than I am into litigation and stuff like that. I like to start and finish something and see it fit together. So that estate work was a thing I really enjoyed.
And ultimately put a file on the shelf.
You got it. You got it. You know how to do it.
We all were at various times asked to be law guardians to get ourselves into the litigation arena. Everybody has a story, especially those who that wasn't their living. Do you have a story or two of being asked to be part of a case that you want to share?
Well, I was invited to be a part of them back when we were getting $25 an hour to do it. And I felt it was more of a civic duty than anything else because you certainly didn't make money at it. But I had the opportunity to be involved in many family situations which were sad, which you didn't realize took place in this community, but did. And now, 20, 25 years later, you see the name of that child in the paper as having been arrested for this or that because their upbringing was such that it was just terrible. But no, I had many years of that and used to sit in the family court outside the office over there in the Hotel Jamestown in the mezzanine, waiting to be called with all the other lawyers sitting there telling their war stories about how their clients were this or that and the other thing. And the client was a little kid who couldn't do anything about it, but the parents were just awful usually. And so yes, I had the opportunity, but I had no special concerns there to do that, no.
Yeah. So Chuck Hall, though, at some point you do take on some people. Can you kind of run us through a chronology of your...
Well, when I began, I moved down from the 9th floor to the 6th floor, and Mark Barger joined me for a while, and we became Hall and Barger. And then we left there, and I went by myself again for several years. And then fortunately Jeff Piazza came along while he was at Akron Law, and he wanted to be a summer intern, and I had done some work for his father at Jamestown Dental Laboratories. And so Bill had recommended I talk to his son, and I did, and it worked out, and we were partners for 20 years. So it was wonderful until he decided he would rather be a judge than a lawyer. So it's worked out, and we campaigned and helped him get elected, so he was there. And then we had a young girl who turned out to be my stepdaughter, but she was also very ambitious, who came here with a GED from South Carolina with a husband and 2 young sons, and was able to go to JCC and then Fredonia and get an application to UB Law School and get admitted, spend a year, come back clerk for 3 years, take the cram course, take the test, and pass. And so she has been a lawyer now probably for about 8-10 years, and we've been partners now for 6 years when Jeff left 2014. So it's been several different associations over the years, and very, very nice to have people who we could work with and who share the job and are willing to put the hours and the time and the effort in, and it's worked out very well. Well, you see people like Howard Crosley, who was a wonderful actor, a very brilliant man, but we used to worry about him going from the Elks to Sinclairville up Prendergast when I lived there, because he had always I had a liquid lunch, and he would go up there and then drive home somewhat erratically and somewhat fast. And so going up Prendergast Avenue. So I knew quite well from practice when Neil used to work for him down there. Tom Dory was very active with that law guardian program. He was something with social services at the time, and then he became a bankruptcy trustee, so I had the opportunity to deal with him in those cases. Warren Erickson became associated with our firm. He and Stanley Weeks turned their file over to us while Stanley was still alive, but not while he was practicing, but Warren turned his over, and he's still alive, but Stanley, of course, has passed away. But Al Ford, of course, was Stan's partner when Stan was starting out a practice in town and hung up a shingle. K.T. Johnson was the president of Moonbrook at one point, and for some reason he, as the president, thought that he was entitled to park right by the front door. So he was somewhat of a character who was always thinking,
Was that right?
oh yeah, he had to park by the front door, and everybody wondered, why is that car out there blocking everything else? But he said, oh, that's the president. So he was president of Moonbrook at one point. So I mean, I had to find somebody who had a positive thing to say about. Well, Lucian was just wonderful to watch him at Lashandro's just go after Doug. He and Doug would have the wonderful arguments. I know you'd go down. Unfortunately, there were times when there would be more lawyers there at Lashandro's than there were at the Bar Association meeting at the same time. But Lucian was always full. Always knew where you stood with him. Always go right back at him and just say, "Hey, this is it, Lucian. Take it or leave it." So we'd have quite wonderful arguments, but he was quite a guy. Walter Miller, of course, was my parents' age, and they used to have parties together. Walter, or Taut Miller as they called him, and his wife Martha. Joe Ricotta used to go before him in Mayville, and he'd tell us all Dunkirk stories as he's spitting his spittoon, and Judge Lee Town Adams really used the spittoon. Yeah. So it was interesting to see them. Cynthia Peterson, I knew her when she was Cynthia Howard.
Sure.
Doug Spoto, of course, put his 40 years in. Now he's raising flowers in his garden, I think, so he's enjoying life. Unfortunately, you see a lot of them who passed away. Tubi Scarpino was always very colorful. Charlie and Sam Price, they were very good lawyers, but they were able to just pull a switch and quit. And I don't see how you can do that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm having trouble with that, struggling myself, not being able to do it. Just not something that they were capable of, and they were very good at it. And talking with Sam and Tom, they just said their father and uncle were just great at that, just deciding that that was enough.
Sherry was the same way.
Sherry was amazing, the same way, yeah. I had many opportunities as a small stockholder in Blackstone to go down there and watch him in action and just run the meeting and say, you do this and you do that, and who's going to make this motion or that motion. And he had Reggie's ear, and it was just wonderful how he would do that. But Sherry was a wonderful guy, and of course he and I shared an aunt and uncle, so we were the Jamestown Schlichter, or whatever you say, were related by marriage. But yeah, he was a wonderful guy. And of course, the new Bob Sharp. Now I don't know if he was still there when you were there, or was he? Yeah, Cadwell and Sharp in the old days. Yeah, no, just reminiscent to think of some of these guys. Unfortunately, some people younger than I have passed away. So that's unfortunate. But to see somebody like a David Stapleton who was able to carry on as a sole practitioner for his whole career, or Greg Yaw pretty much did that himself. He started with Brian York, but then he went on his own. But it's just interesting to look at some of these people. Lanny Sheffield, I understand he's very happy playing Texas Hold'em poker out in Las Vegas and making a living doing it, so that's wonderful. Good for him. But so I'm sorry, I can't think of any special things other than the enjoyable arguments you used to have with Lucian. It was always fun to play with him. So
absolutely.
You knew where you stood. In a small community, the opportunity to be on boards and commissions and do other things like that. And the idea of just seeing how well you've done with the Jackson Center and the other things that I'm happy to have been associated with in prior years. You didn't ask me about the movie that you were in down at your fraternity at Allegheny, where my connection with Michael Eisner was able to get your group a copy of that movie, but so you didn't do that. But just the idea that we both had a connection with Betty LeNay, and you had more of one with Carl Kappa than I did, but just some of the strong feature. I mean, I've been very close with a Lillian Nay type thing. I mean, we've been wonderfully blessed in this community to have some people who are willing to give their time and effort, energy, money to keep things going. So I've just enjoyed the opportunities I've had outside of the law practice, which gives you the chance to be involved. And of course, every organization wants a lawyer on their board, so you're asked to be on too many boards, but you have to do your part to do that. So that's been a wonderful part of the professional of being a lawyer, is that it allows you time and the effort and the opportunity and the experience to be able to help out local agencies. So that's been a good part of the years.
So many people have affiliated with you with the Gebby Foundation as chairman of the Gebby Foundation. It's always been in a very growth mode, but there was a period of time where the Gebby Foundation made a conscious decision to get into economic development. You know, rather than, you know, many foundations reacting to sort of social needs, that not that you turned your back on it, but to make a difference. And you were part of that, Chuck. What was some of the thinking at the time? Because that was brand new, you know, to really sort of pivot and go into that area.
Well, we had a retreat at the Gebby Foundation down at Ellicottville, and went to the Ellicottville brewing company down there, and we had some Red Stripe beer, it is. And out of that came the idea that we should be doing more to help the whole community rather than just playing Santa Claus to the human service agencies. We had been that, and we had become a dominant force in many of their fundings, and just felt that it was time that we have to do something to raise the level of everybody in the community, thinking that a rising tide floats all boats instead of just fixing the particular ones we had. We had been very much involved with Chautauqua with the dormitories up there for the Bellinger stuff and all the things that we had done up there. We had been very active with the United Way. I had had the opportunity to be clerk of the works for the two-mansion restoration that John Hamilton said, we don't want a Jiffy Lube there, let's buy that place and fix it up. So a lot of things we had done in the community, but it came that time. And I was a president, and so I had the opportunity on one day, starting at 8 o'clock in the morning, to go through 8 human service agencies in this community to say, I'm sorry, we've changed our plans. We've been very happy to help you over the years, but we're phasing out over 3 years because we're directing our investment now to downtown Jamestown, and particularly the west side. And we think we're going to try to build an ice arena. We've done some working on that to try to bring more development to the downtown area. So we know that the strong agencies will be able to find another way, or maybe there'll be combinations, but there'll just be an opportunity for you to look in another direction for your funding going forward. And we were very pleased to see that we didn't lose any agencies. They all went forward with arrangements to make other plans to get their funding, and did so very successfully. But it was kind of an opportunity for me to sit there for different heads of different agencies. It would be the executive director and their president of their volunteer board to come in, so I could sit there and just say, I'm sorry, but this is it. So it was a long day.
I bet. And the proof is in the pudding. And the Gebby Foundation, and I'd be remiss if I didn't put on record that, but for Chuck Hall, and I know you deflect this, but you, when we got the idea of the Jackson Center, and Carl Kappa and Betty Lene, and at the time your executive director Tom Cardman was in on some of the early meetings, but when funding came around to it, it was a Chuck Hall-led Gebby board, which gave us $500,000, I'll say it on the record, for operating money at the time, and I didn't fully appreciate the concept of that grant, the operating money, but and I'm just curious, behind the scenes, what it might have been, behind the curtain that you saw, because I don't recall us really giving you a big proposal. I don't recall anything that was even a presentation of note to the Gebby Foundation. But so I'm frank. I'm curious to what it was that maybe drove you or the board to think.
Well, I don't want the credit. I was part of the group, including Lillian Nay, Roe Henderson, and our board, who was at that time was a very active, wonderful board. I mean, we had Buck Franks and George Campbell, and gosh, I'm going to leave some out that I shouldn't, but there were 9 of us who were all very interested in the community. And when Betty Lene and Carl Kappa have something in mind and say, oh, we're going to put Greg Peterson in front of it kind of says, we got to get behind this thing to help it out. So we wanted to do anything we could to what we thought was betterment of the community. And we were very happy to do that. We had had some issues with the Roger Tory Peterson Institute because we were told that this would be a national thing and we wouldn't have to carry it for so long. And we unfortunately ended up doing a lot more than we intended to at Roger Tory Peterson to build that building. But on the other hand, we were looking for something else to bring it downtown, and we thought of Jackson Center as being downtown, and so we were hoping to get that going. So it was a pleasure to work with you then, now, and always, but we had a good board, so I was just happened to be in a position there where I could help it along, but it was very good. So.
Well, I believe me, that was a godsend for us then, and obviously launched us to where we are now. And I want to thank you for that leadership. One vignette, I remember, it must have been Tom, probably called me and said, Greg, by the way, we've agreed to provide this $500,000 year scaled out grant operations. And oh, by the way, could you send us something for our file? I don't think it works that way at all anymore.
Yeah. It doesn't. It's become much more formalized, and we developed that practice. We even developed term limits after a while, so it's not like I had the opportunity to be on the board for 30 years. So we hope that isn't going to happen in the future, that there's turnover, because we need young blood and new blood and stuff like that, but we're all in our formative years. And I was just fortunate to be sort of a protege for John Hamilton in the beginning, because he was very good friends with my parents. He and Faith were constant companions of my parents, and he thought that I might be somebody who could get involved with him. And so I was the young kid on the block for many years with John and Gerald Hunt and Jenny Vimmerstead and Buck Franks and the group, Bill Parker and the group who really began this thing. So it was just my pleasure. But you'll see the old pictures of this skinny looking young kid in there, and that's me. But that was it.
Talk about John Hamilton. He was executive director for 25 some years.
Tremendous gentleman, just character, true character, a person you could count on. If he said it's raining or it's snowing in July, you'd go get your coat, because he just was absolutely the person who you could really float your boat. I mean, he would be the one who would lead you and not lead you astray. And he was just an amazingly devoted to the community. I mean, he came here from Canandaigua, but he just adopted the community and did everything here. It just was a wonderful man. But he really was a community servant. He just was. And of course, he was a very good banker in his day as well. But I knew him more when Steve Christian was running Chautauqua National Bank than when he was. So he had retired to the Gebby, and he brought it along from beginning with Marion and Gebby and Mrs. Bellinger to get it started, and he just was there from the beginning and fought with Mr. Rogerson to get the money back that he could from Phelps Can Company, which he did. But he was a real character gentleman, a real person of integrity.
You weren't around, or were you around for the litigation, the Phelps Can?
I was not.
No.
Yeah.
That had all
been taken care of by then. And at the time, the Gebby was like $16 million, and we thought that was all the money in the world. And by the time I finished, it was like 90-some million. It was just amazing the way it developed. We were very fortunate with our investments, and it just worked out very well. And we started with just about all Carnation stock, because Carnation had bought Phelps Can and bought everything. So the Gebby family was left with a ton of Carnation stock. And so that was our beginning, and it took a while to convince some of the members that it was time to diversify, but we were able to do that. Bill Parker was quite disappointed with that idea, but the rest of us felt that we got to do something, because something could happen with Carnation that might not prove well over the future. So we diversified and got professional help with our management, so it worked out well.
And United Way, Chuck Hall and United Way. I mean, I always, again, had so many things of which I associate you with, but was that something that was kind of your father was involved in United Way, that you were just a natural Or is that something you got involved in?
No, my father was involved in the creation 100 years ago because he was very active in the Rotary Club, and the Rotary Club started that just like they started Moonbrook. And so he was very interested in the United Way. It was then called the Community Chest, and they had the Red Feather campaign. And so he at one point developed a Hall Family Trust, which was to generate income for both the Community Chest for half of it and St. Luke's Church for the other half. And after he passed away, I was able to get that split between the United Way and St. Luke's, and we divided it, and that became what's now the United Way Forever Fund, and now it's some United Way Endowment Fund. So that was the genesis of that. But I came back and was involved with the city when I was invited to join something called the United Way Planning Council, which was the planning arm of it. So I became that, and then became chairman of that, and then they thought, why don't you join the board? And so I was on the board, and I was vice president when Dick Parker was called to Buffalo by Marine Midland Bank, so I took over his balance of his term, and then I was elected for another term. So I was president in 1981-82 of United Way. So I was active in then, and I was on that board for like 25 years. They couldn't get rid of me, I guess. I just was there, and they said, keep coming. So I finally was able to say thank you. I had the opportunity to let somebody else do it. But so yeah, I was involved in the United Way. Had the opportunity. The one that I'm still with is the Lakeview Cemetery Association. I'm the treasurer and chairman of the investment committee, and I've been on that board for I think 41 years at this point. But I've been president and active in that. And at one point I was president of the town club when it was more of a private club than it is, of course, now a restaurant. And the ice arena, we called it Jamestown Center City Development Corporation. I had the opportunity to be president of that, and following my father, I was president of Moonbrook for one term as well. So I've had an opportunity to be involved in lots of different agencies or organizations around the town. So it's been fun. But my father was the opening treasurer and then was president in the beginning of Moonbrook, and that was really something he struggled with. He got it out of bankruptcy twice, but I'm just pleased that that's been able to continue on for as long as it is, and I'd love to do whatever I can to keep them going because it's been wonderful. So very, very pleased. And at the cemetery, we were blessed with a group of trustees who many years ago saw the importance of investing, and they invested very well. So we have some funds to manage that with very well up there. So I'm very pleased that we're able to keep the park-like atmosphere of Lakeview Cemetery just to be something for the community to be proud of. It's in very good shape. We got a wonderful executive director now in Hugh Golden, who's doing such a great job up there.
You're amazing. For the benefit of the young lawyer who might be watching this, is there some advice you get to give to him? So if somebody comes into your office, as I did with a guy with Sherry Cadwell and also Bob Wright, saying what to expect and things to kind of give a little guidance to, what might you give a young person?
Well, just the opportunity to listen to your client, to see what it is they want, and make sure you return the phone calls before the day is over. Those are the things you want to do to make sure that you don't get a grievance or a problem there is, to keep your clients involved and advised of what's going on. But just the opportunity now, I think the Bar Association is getting into this mentoring program, which would be very good, and I think that's very important that you see how to do these things. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of joining an existing firm to see what forms you do where and how to do it and have somebody to talk to, because hanging a shingle out now is very daunting. I wouldn't want to do it myself. So I don't know, I would just like to have them and take them around and take them in tow to show them how the situation operates, because law school doesn't tell you anything about the practice of law. It just tells you about the law that's on the books. So practical speaking, you don't get that benefit from it. So
this has been remarkable, Chuck. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, but put this in the archives and hope it never comes out. So.